Jean-Benoit, you're drawing parallel with Champagne when you think about climate change in Nova Scotia. Can you explain to me what you mean by that?
On the topic of climate change, it is very interesting to realize that within the last 3 years, we witnessed two of the symptoms that have defined Champagne in the last 10 years or 15 years. Because one could postulate that Nova Scotia, from a climatic standpoint, is a little bit of a carbon copy of Champagne 25 years ago. And so therefore, looking at what Champagne is going through at the present time could be the act of almost looking into a crystal ball, to gain insight into what may await, climatically and from a growing standpoint. And what we've seen climatically are two things that have a direct incidence on style and harvest decision. One is that harvest dates are earlier and earlier. The correlation between the heat units and the necessity to pick earlier because the metabolization of the sugars is much quicker is undeniable. So there is a cause to effect relationship between the heat units and how quickly the sugar develops like in the fruit. And so therefore harvest dates in Champagne, let's say, were traditionally at the end of September a while back, and ultimately that became over time mid-September, then early September, and now we're definitely into August, end of August. And so as an average harvest date. And so that correlation between climate change and earlier harvest dates is absolutely quantified and undeniable. And the other thing too is that the reason why there is this incredibly proportional kind of cost to effect relationship between the two heat units and harvest dates is because there is a prerequisite for a set amount of sugars in the fruit. So if it happens quicker, the metabolization of that sugar, then the only thing that you can do not to exceed 12% alcohol as a finished product is to harvest sooner. And we've seen that in Nova Scotia. We've seen that in 2016. We've seen that in 2017. And most recently, we've seen that in 2020 with record harvest dates in terms of kind of their how early they were and how premature they were. So that's one thing that we know, will most likely happen. And there is the distinct possibility that an important component of the complexity of Nova Scotia wine has to do with our ability to elongate the growing season, especially at the end. And so therefore, that is something to look for. And the other thing is, we've seen in Champagne in the last 10 years a struggle with spring frost because extremely warm temperature in February and early March can lead to bud break, premature bud break. Let's say, like the first week of March or the second week of March. And what that does is it then puts an incredible amount of stress because the vines or the buds, have to survive in an environment where the temperatures cannot go below zero starting in mid-March. And that's easier said than done, which is why every year, to some extent, there is an instance of a spring frost, at least in one microclimate or another, whether that's in Champagne or in Chablis or in a lot of the northern vineyards in France. And it may come across as counterintuitive that a frost, is a direct byproduct of climate change, but the reason why that is because ultimately what makes the frost a threat is the earlier bud break, which then prompts, this necessity for the buds to be in an environment without temperature sub-zero for an extended period of time. And perhaps not coincidentally, in 2018, we had one of those events in Nova Scotia. And so it is certainly plausible that looking at the past is no guarantee, that it is a once in a lifetime event because we may not have seen a lot of spring frost looking back, but I don't know how accurate that is a predicting tool for the future. So these would be, two important facets that are completely connected to traditional method sparkling that do define, like potentially some of what the challenges may be for Nova Scotia.